Okay, hi there, it's Dylan from EatWild, and I wanted to talk about terrain features, and I wanted to talk about ground cover that will um, allow you to gain access from somewhere like this at the bottom of the valley where there's a road, or in this case a river, up into the alpine areas of a mountain where you might be chasing after mule deer or sheep. There's a lot of common mistakes that people will make in terms of getting stuck in terrain traps, and also having to push through very difficult forest types or terrain covers such as willow and subalpine fir that make it very difficult to walk through. So a couple things I can point out on this ridge here is you're always looking for the lowest angle to get up into the alpine. So over here I'm looking at the ridge line that's at about 35 degrees, running from my left to right over here. I would target that as my main route up the hill. I see a lot of other possibilities. Going straight up the hill here, we're dealing with maybe closer to a 40-degree slope, which is almost impossible to climb up, certainly with a pack on. It'd be very difficult. And particularly if there's different terrain covers or ground cover that make it very difficult to walk through. There's a few different ground covers here that you can see from here that I can point out. Down low you can see that there's mature timber. Now mature timber typically is one of the things I target and look for gaining elevation, because there's still the bigger trees, there's enough room between the trees that you can walk between them, and there's not too much understory. However, you got to watch out for blowdown. So if you see lots of dead trees in amongst the mature trees, you're most likely going to be walking over or through blowdown, which can be a big challenge. So you're looking for healthy mature forest, and if you can see a spine of that running up the ridgeline, just like we can see over here, there's the mature forest runs almost halfway up the hill on that 30-degree slope, which will make for a good access point to gain some elevation. The other forest types you're going to see here, which you're going to run into as you try to gain elevation or try to gain get up into the alpine, you're going to see the willow. And that's the sort of you can see it's a darker green, but not as dark as the conifer forest. That willow almost runs in some places all the way to the top of the mountain. Wherever there's lots of water, there's going to be willow, and that willow can be ankle high or it can be 8 feet high. And certainly in gullies it's probably most pronounced. So if you find yourself in a gully with willow, you're gonna have a really hard time moving up the hill. There's some lighter green stuff that you can see, almost like a neon green on the mountain over there. That usually is an indicator of moss, and moss often means swamp. So the good news is you're not dealing with 8-foot high willow, but you might be sinking down about a foot when you step on that wet moss, which can really tire you out fast. So you might want to avoid areas like that. As you get up higher in the mountain, you're going to see patches of brown up there. Now those are that's scree slope or dirt, and you're getting close to the high alpine area. Scree slope, you can cover some ground, but it's awfully dangerous. It's steep and there's loose rocks. You got to be careful as you're transiting over scree slopes. When you get up high enough, you'll find lichen and mosses and wildflowers and grasses, which all make for good ground cover to gain, to wander around in the alpine. But you got to get up to that elevation, which is usually around 5,500 feet is when you start to find true alpine, at least here in British Columbia. They can vary depending on if you're in the coastal forest or if you're out in the interior. But once you've gained that alpine, then traveling is a lot easier going. So one of the things I focus on is if I'm trying to get all the way to the far end of this ridge where I think there might be some sheep or some mule deer, what I may well do is I'll gain the elevation where I've got the terrain feature, such as that soft ridge and some old growth forest to get as high as I can, and then I'll work my way up, gain that elevation, and then I will work my way across the mountain in the high alpine where it's much easier going. So instead of taking a direct route to your destination, which might take you through some of those terrain features and forest cover types that are impossible, I'll take the long route, but in the end it often saves me a lot of time. There's a few other features here you're going to have to look at before you pick a route. This is a very pronounced mountain, and it happens to be the one that's across from us in camp, and it may not be the best example of where I'd go. This would be a very difficult mountain to navigate. some of the reasons why is that there's a number of canyons in each one of the gullies. There's significant canyons which can be very difficult to cross, if not impossible. So if you're planning a route, you'll have to either go above those canyons or go below those canyons if you had to have any chance of getting where you want to go. If you look over to our right, so you can see a very the soft rolling ridge that comes right down to the river here with old growth forest all the way to the top, and then it breaks out into really lovely rolling alpine for quite some ways. That's one of the areas that we spent time focused here on our sheep trip hunting, and we gained elevation via that old growth forest, which there happened to be a horse trail going up about halfway up there, which helped us out greatly. And then we got up on the ridges and were able to traverse the ridges. So I'll show you a few more shots of some of those different forest cover types, and hopefully that's a little bit of a help when you're planning your next trip up into the Alpine. Okay, so there's sort of three forest cover types that we're trying to avoid. This is one of them that's really difficult to walk through. This little subalpine fir goes super dense, and right here it's actually not too bad because you can actually step over it. But when it gets to be about 2 feet high, it's almost impenetrable. It grabs your feet and really slows you down. So when we're looking up at a hillside, we want to avoid picking spots where there's a whole lot of this ground cover, and try and find a spot where there's enough meadows and stuff around it that are a little bit easier to get through, or potentially mature trees are a little easier. So we'll look at some of them in a bit. Wall of fir, impenetrable. Trying to get over to that ridge over there, so Rick's assessing out if there's a little seam through that fir we can get through. Otherwise we'll have to climb back up and around it. Looks like he's got something. Okay, another one you're going to see in the high alpine that's a challenging one to navigate is willow, and you can usually see it really clearly on the landscape because it turns with the fall, and usually if you're climbing around for hunting, you're going to see it turn a little bit yellow. You can see it's just starting to turn now. We're here in early August, so it's still pretty green, but it's a real challenging one to get through. Sometimes though it's short enough that you can still get, if you can step over it, you're okay. So when you're still having to step through it, it's really challenging. My first choice is always going to find a game trail to help navigate through some of the willow or the fir. But once you're up in the Alpine, you're going to find that there's going to be kind of a patchy ecosystem. And you can see here there's some grass and stuff, which is really nice and easy going, grass and moss. So what I'll probably do here, with the absence of a trail, I'm just going to pick a route and avoid the patches of difficult vegetation to navigate through. I can see Rick up ahead there, just top of his pack. We're just grinding our way through this super thick berry bush, and we happen to have found a trail that makes it a lot easier. We were sort of on route to just try and pound all the way up this hill here to get up to Alpine, but it's just torture. It's just so thick, as you can see, that it was just beating us up too hard. But fortunately we found it could be a horse trail, or at least a really well-used game trail that's giving us a little bit of a break. Over on this side, it's pretty ugly as well. You can see that there's some terrain traps as far as the big canyons, and then no shortage of that dark green timber that'll make it difficult to get up. So we picked the other side of the valley, which is a little nicer going, and we got about 2 kilometers to get up to where we hope to start spotting some sheep. So once you get above like 5,000, 5,500 feet, you should start to see heather, and heather is a good sign of being easygoing, sort of alpine or tundra walking. And you can tell by the color of green when you're looking across the hill. So if you look across the hill here, you can see all the forest types on these hills across the way, and you start to figure out what color represents what ground cover type, and you start to pick your route based on that.